Chapter 10 The Adventures of Bigfoot and Littlefoot. "It's the Green Whistler!" cried Hugo. The squidges screamed and jumped to their feet. "Sit down, everyone!" ordered Mrs. Nuckluck. "We'll all stay right here until that creature is caught." "What will they do to it when they catch it?" asked Boone, who was still standing near the door. "I'm not sure, Boone," said Mrs. Nuckluck. "Now come back in the classroom, please." But Boone shook his head. "Mrs. Nuckluck, I am going to be a cryptozoologist," he said stoutly. "And that thing out there is a cryptid, so I have to help it if I can." Then he turned and dashed out the door. It took Hugo a second to decide what he needed to do. Boone was his best friend. He had once saved Hugo from drowning in the Rippleworm River. They were Bigfoot and Littlefoot, future cryptozoologists. If Boone was going after the Green Whistler, Hugo was too. He leapt out of his seat and ran out of the classroom. Behind him he could hear Mrs. Nuckluck yelling for him to come back. He knew he was going to be in big trouble. He kept going anyway. "Wait for me, Boone," he called when he spied Boone up ahead in a passageway. "I'm coming with you." Boone turned around, surprised to see Hugo. "Are you sure?" Boone asked. "I'm totally sure," Hugo replied. Once again, I have to be honest with you. Hugo was not totally sure. He was only mostly sure. After all, they were chasing a dangerous monster, and on top of that, the monster might be a squid-eating monster, so you can't really blame Hugo for being a tiny bit not sure. Hugo and Boone hurried along the passageway as quietly as possible. A few times, Boone's sneakers slapped against the floor, but Hugo's bare feet did not make a sound. Neither did the monster detector. That meant the Green Whistler was not nearby. Secretly, Hugo felt relieved. The passageway widened and then narrowed and then twisted and turned. Hugo kept listening for the click-click of the monster detector, or, even worse, the dreaded whistle of the Green Whistler. But the only sound he heard was the growling of his own stomach. It made him think of the acorn butter and raspberry cream sandwiches still sitting in his lunch bag back at school. "Maybe the Green Whistler went a different way," Hugo said hopefully. "Maybe," Boone said. "Or it might have left the cavern altogether," Hugo said, his voice brightening. But then they heard it. Click, click, click. Hugo looked down at his wrist. The weechy moths were flapping their wings. Hugo felt a lump of dread in the place where his acorn butter and raspberry cream sandwiches should have been. "Does that mean what I think it means?" Boone asked. Hugo nodded. Boone smiled. With a deep but whispery voice, Boone said, "In the dark, spooky cavern, Bigfoot and Littlefoot were hot on the trail of the legendary Green Whistler." "What?" Hugo was confused. In his regular voice, Boone said, "This will be a chapter in the book I'm going to write about us one day, you know, The Adventures of Bigfoot and Littlefoot." He glanced shyly at Hugo. "I mean, if you still think that we make a good team and all." Hugo cleared his throat. In his deepest voice, he whispered, "Bigfoot and Littlefoot were so close to the monster they could smell it." They really could smell it, too. There was a strange odor in the passageway, both sharp and musty. It made their noses wrinkle up. Boone continued the story. "The cavern was swarming with poisonous snakes, hissing and slithering across their path." He looked over at Hugo because this was sort of a lie. "Nice touch," Hugo whispered approvingly. Boone continued in his deep voice. "Still, they had to stop the beast before it hurt someone, or someone hurt it." That was true, thought Hugo. Then he wondered out loud, "But how will we stop it?" "Not sure yet," Boone said in his regular Boone voice. "When the time comes, we'll know what to do." He said this with such confidence that Hugo felt certain Boone was right. Hugo continued the story. Even though there was danger all around them, Bigfoot wasn't afraid because Littlefoot was with him. And Littlefoot was the smartest, bravest, and best friend any squidge could ever have. "Thanks, Hugo," Boone said quietly. And that's when they knew everything would be okay between them. Chapter 11 will be Twists and Turns.